You will never look at the Moments members the same way again. It began with a trembling voice, a man mourning the loss of his partner of over 4 decades. The words, "It's a sad occasion. Untimely death of my partner," cut like a knife through the silence. But this wasn't just about one man's passing. It was the spark that ignited a much darker truth. The Moments, once adored for their soul-soaked harmonies and unforgettable ballads, carried secrets so heavy that even their music couldn't mask the weight. And now, for the first time, those secrets are unraveling. Think about it. A group capable of giving the world timeless anthems like "Love on a Two-Way Street" and "Sexy Mama," yet trapped in a maze of betrayals, vanishing royalties, and hidden voices. Why did a band at the peak of stardom suddenly lose the right to even call themselves the Moments? Who pulled the strings, and what deals were made in back rooms that forced them to abandon their very identity? These are not just questions of fame, they are questions of power, survival, and the silent price of success. Whispers in the industry suggest voices were swapped, tracks secretly altered, and contracts designed to suffocate rather than protect. Some say tapes vanished. Others claim fortunes disappeared without explanation. And when master recordings worth $500,000 went up in flames, was it simply an accident or the final nail in the coffin of their legacy? These are the kinds of mysteries that were buried for decades, glossed over by award shows and hit records, but never forgotten by the men who lived them. This is not the polished story you've been told in interviews or album liner notes. This is the hidden chapter where friendships fractured, identities blurred, and fame turned into a curse. Because once you understand the lawsuits, the silenced voices, the strokes of bad luck, and the calculated moves of powerful label owners, you'll see the Moments in a way you never imagined. Every great story promises answers, and this one is no different. The tale of the Moments isn't simply a nostalgic walk through R&B's golden age. It is a deeper dive into the struggles, battles, and hidden truths that shaped and at times shattered the men behind the music. By the end of this video, you will understand why success often came hand in hand with pain for this legendary group. You will discover how a name that once lit up marquees was stripped away in a boardroom, why royalties disappeared into legal black holes, and how friendships and careers were tested under pressures few outsiders could ever imagine. But before we begin unraveling these layers, let us be clear about the framework of this story. Everything you are about to hear is drawn from publicly available sources, archived interviews, court filings, published articles, and historical records. In certain moments, we will refer to accounts described by industry insiders, band members, or journalists. Where those details are disputed, they will be framed as allegations rather than undisputed fact. This is important because the world of music, contracts, publishing rights, and industry politics is complex and often clouded by decades of litigation secrecy and personal testimony. Our goal is not to sensationalize, but to shed light on how these men navigated the treacherous waters of fame. When we say unpaid royalties or loss of masters, we are pointing to documented lawsuits and first-hand statements, not speculation invented for drama. When we highlight the mysterious circumstances around label ownership or missing credits, we do so with respect, always clarifying whether the evidence is confirmed, suggested, or alleged. This keeps the story compelling while staying fair to the people involved. So here is our promise to you: in the next chapters, we will walk through the rise, fall, and rebirth of the Moments with clarity and honesty. We will explore their meteoric climb from Washington, D.C. street corners to the Billboard charts and the heartbreaking battles that unfolded in the shadows of that success. Along the way, we will raise the difficult questions. Questions about ownership, exploitation, and justice that still echo in today's music industry. At the same time, we invite you, the viewer, to approach this story not only as entertainment, but as history. The struggles of the Moments mirror the struggles of countless other artists, and understanding their journey helps us understand how music, money, and power have always been intertwined. By grounding ourselves in public records and known testimony, we can honor their legacy without distorting the truth. The story of the Moments begins not with chart-topping hits or glamorous stages, but with a simple dream born in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1960s. At that time, the city was alive with the sounds of doo-wop harmonies and gospel-infused R&B. It was within this cultural atmosphere that three young men, Eric Ollis Sr., Richard Gross, and John Morgan, came together. They weren't celebrities yet. They were just voices blending on street corners, driven by nothing more than a shared love of music and the belief that harmony could carry them somewhere greater. Their early lineup was marked by brotherhood. Eric, Richard, and John were more than colleagues, they were companions navigating the uncertainty of an unforgiving industry. In 1965, their lives shifted when they encountered the Mizell brothers Freddie Perrin and Toby Jackson, who together launched Hog Records. The Moments signed with this fledgling label and cut their first tracks including Baby I Want You and Pray For Me. Those recordings didn't yet dominate the charts, but they were proof that the group's collective dream could translate into vinyl grooves. But as in so many music stories, the lineup began to change almost as soon as it had formed. By the late 1960s, Mark Green had joined the fold. Green's voice carried a depth and rawness that would soon become a cornerstone of their early identity. Around this same time, the group left Hog Records and aligned themselves with Stang Records, the newly established label owned by Sylvia Robinson and her husband Joe Robinson. This was more than a business deal. It was a turning point in their lives. Sylvia, a savvy and charismatic figure, who had already tasted fame as one half of the duo Mickey and Sylvia, took a keen interest in shaping the group's sound and image. Her relationship with the members was not distant or detached. She was a mentor, a strategist, and at times a confidant. To the young singers, she was both opportunity and authority, someone whose vision could elevate them, but whose control could also dictate their fate. In 1968, the group struck gold with Not on the Outside. With Mark Green on lead vocals, the single reached number 13 on the R&B chart and crossed over to the Billboard Hot 100, landing at number 57. For the first time, the Moments weren't just another local act, they were a group with national attention. That success opened doors to larger audiences, bigger venues, and a sense that their dream was becoming real. Behind the scenes, Sylvia Robinson pushed the group forward with an iron will. She assembled a management team that included high-profile radio personalities like Frankie Crocker, Herb Hamlet, and Eddie O'J. This gave the group valuable exposure. When these men spun the Moments records or plugged their concerts on air, it gave the group a legitimacy that no ad campaign could buy. Herb Hamlet in particular became more than just a promoter. He was a long-term supporter, continuing to book the group in upstate New York even after he relocated to a different station. Still, fame came with turbulence. By 1969, tension inside the group and with the label had reached a boiling point. Eric Ollis, Richard Gross, and even John Morgan, the men who had started it all, walked away from all platinum records, unhappy with how things were being handled. That departure left a vacuum that was quickly filled by Al Goodman and William "Billy" Brown. Billy Brown brought with him the experience of having sung with the Broadways, a group that had recorded under MGM. His voice was smooth yet powerful, capable of both tender ballads and commanding choruses. Al Goodman, meanwhile, had worn many hats: performer, studio assistant, even songwriter. Together with John Morgan, they represented the next iteration of the Moments. In the early 1970s, another crucial figure entered Harry Ray. When Billy Brown temporarily lost his voice to vocal problems, Harry stepped in as lead. His silky delivery gave the Moments their signature romantic sound on hits like Sexy Mama 1973 and Look at Me, I'm in Love 1975. Audiences adored him, and even after Brown recovered, Harry remained an essential presence. This trio, Ray, Goodman, and Brown, would eventually become the most recognized face of the group. But the story doesn't end with just who was singing. The relationships between these men and their label shaped every chapter. Sylvia Robinson was more than a businesswoman. She was a force. Some members whispered that she sometimes layered her own voice onto tracks or brought in outside vocalists without crediting them fully. Whether alleged or true, this created a fog of confusion. Fans never knew exactly whose voices they were hearing on every song. What is certain is that Sylvia's close connection with the group's members blurred the line between support and control, mentorship and manipulation. By 1979, cracks had become impossible to ignore. Disagreements with Joe and Sylvia Robinson escalated to the point where the Moments walked away from Stang Records. But leaving cost them dearly. They lost the rights to their very name. To the fans, they had always been the Moments. But legally, they were no longer allowed to use that title. They rebranded as Ray Goodman and Brown, a move that was both a rebirth and a wound. Imagine building a reputation only to have your own identity taken from you. That was the reality they faced. Still, as Ray Goodman and Brown, they proved they were more than just a label's property. Their 1980 single Special Lady soared to #1 on the R&B chart and reached #5 on the Billboard Hot 100, cementing them as survivors. Even so, the echoes of betrayal, legal entanglements, and personal struggles remained close at hand. When you trace the group's timeline, 1965 formation, 1968, breakthrough, 1969 departures, 1973, peak hits, 1979 reinvention, you see more than dates and facts. You see a living organism constantly reshaping itself under pressure. Members left and returned, friendships were tested, voices rose and fell, and through it all, the Moments carried on. They were not static. They were ever-changing, like the industry that both elevated and punished them. And at the heart of this saga are the individuals Eric Ollis, Richard Gross, John Morgan, the originators. Mark Green, whose voice gave them their first chart success. Billy Brown, whose velvet tones became their trademark. Al Goodman, the steady backbone who spoke for the group when needed. And Harry Ray, the romantic lead, whose voice defined an era, but whose life ended too soon. Each man carried his own story, his own scars, his own reason for holding on to the dream. Together, their lives intertwined not just through music, but through the constant push and pull of loyalty, ambition, and survival. The story of the Moments is best understood as a timeline, a chain of breakthroughs and breakdowns that shaped not only their music, but also the way fans would remember them forever. Each milestone carried with it both triumph and pain, and between the dates there were secrets whispered, decisions questioned, and lives changed forever. In the heart of Washington, D.C., 3 young men, Eric Ollis Sr., Richard Gross, and John Morgan, came together to form a small harmony group. Their dream was simple: to turn their passion for music into a legacy. They signed their first deal with Hog Records, cutting songs like Baby I Want You and Pray For Me. These tracks were modest, but they marked the beginning of a group destined for bigger things. The arrival of Mark Green shifted the group's chemistry. With his voice at the forefront, they signed to Sylvia and Joe Robinson's newly formed Stang Records. Under Sylvia's guidance, the group released Not on the Outside, which quickly climbed to #13 on the R&B charts. This was their first taste of real success. But whispers surrounded the recording process. Some alleged that Sylvia Robinson herself layered her vocals into certain tracks, while other studio singers may have provided uncredited backing harmonies. Whether true or not, the speculation added an air of mystery to their early catalog. Fans were never entirely sure who they were hearing. Success came, but so did conflict. By 1969, original members Eric Ollis, Richard Gross, and even John Morgan became frustrated with how business was being handled at All Platinum Records. They walked away, leaving behind the very group they had built. To keep the name alive, the Robinsons brought in Al Goodman and William Billy Brown, alongside John Morgan, who stayed for a while. It was a survival move, but it also marked the start of the group's identity crisis. On album covers and promotional materials, sometimes the faces didn't match the voices fans heard on the records. Tracks were re-recorded with different leads, but often the original background vocals remained, creating confusion about who truly performed what. By the early 1970s, another turning point came with Harry Ray, who replaced Johnny Moore after a brief stint. Harry's voice became the group's centerpiece, especially on songs like Sexy Mama, 1973, and Look at Me, I'm in Love, 1975. His arrival gave the Moments a distinctive romantic sound that solidified their place in R&B history. But even in their most celebrated years, there were signs of instability. Former members accused the label of unfair practices, and some hinted that royalties were being withheld. Fans, however, only saw the polished exterior, three sharply dressed men delivering love songs with effortless charm. That year, their collaboration with the Whatnots produced Girls Part 1, which not only hit the US R&B charts, but also soared to number 3 on the UK singles chart. International fame seemed certain. Yet behind the curtain, there were unresolved tensions about ownership management and financial transparency. According to industry insiders, some members felt increasingly trapped in contracts they didn't fully understand. The real heartbreak came in 1979. After disagreements with Sylvia and Joe Robinson reached a breaking point, the group left Stang Records. But leaving came with a price. The Robinsons legally owned the name The Moments. Overnight, the men who had made the name famous could no longer use it. They re-emerged as Ray Goodman and Brown. To fans, it was still the same voices, the same harmonies. But for the group, it was a painful reminder of how little control artists often had over their own identities. It was as if their legacy had been stolen in a boardroom. In a rare reversal of fortune, the newly renamed trio released Special Lady. The song became a #1 R&B hit and climbed to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. It proved they were more than just a name, they were an institution of sound. Yet even as they celebrated, legal disputes loomed. Questions about past royalties and unpaid publishing rights began to surface. Whispers grew louder. Had decades of hard work been siphoned off by record executives? Tragedy struck when Harry Ray died suddenly of a stroke at just 45 years old. His death left fans devastated and the group shaken. Harry wasn't just a singer, he was the emotional core of their sound. Without him, the harmonies that once felt invincible now carried an undertone of loss. A fire destroyed the Sugar Hill studio where many of their master tapes were stored. Al Goodman later admitted he lost nearly $500,000 worth of recordings. For the group, it was like watching their life's work vanish in smoke. Fans saw it as a tragic accident, but some wondered if the lack of proper archival care was another sign of how little the industry valued the very artists who built its foundations. In a twist, few could have predicted Alicia Keys invited Ray Goodman and Brown to provide backing vocals on her hit, You Don't Know My Name. The collaboration reintroduced their sound to a new generation and led to television appearances alongside Beyoncé and Missy Elliott. Billy Brown later called Alicia their angel, crediting her with keeping the group alive during a slow period. On July 26, 2010, Al Goodman passed away at the age of 67. His death marked the end of an era. For nearly 40 years, he had been both a voice and a spokesperson for the group, the man who often explained their struggles and triumphs to the world. His absence left a void no one could truly fill. Billy Brown, the last original link to their glory days, suffered a stroke in 2016. Fans feared it might be the end of the group, but against all odds, he recovered and returned to the stage. His resilience became symbolic no matter how many setbacks came their way. The Moments, or Ray Goodman and Brown, would not disappear. By 2022, Kevin Owens and Larry Winfrey had left, replaced by Keenan Blount and Kenny Brown. Billy Brown remained the only tie to the past. Meanwhile, original member Mark Green, who had long complained about unpaid royalties, refused an invitation to rejoin. Instead, he revived his own version of the band, performing as The Moments, featuring Mark Green. The fractured legacy raised difficult questions. Who truly represented the Moments? Was it the new lineup with Billy Brown, or Green's legal claim to the original name for fans? The confusion was painful. For the members, it was yet another reminder of how contracts and ownership battles can outlast even the most enduring songs. From their humble beginnings in 1965 to their fractured lineups in 2022, the Moments lived every stage of the artist's journey. Discovery, fame, betrayal, reinvention, and survival. Along the way came whispers of hidden voices, accusations of lost royalties and tragedies that claimed lives too soon. And while the world remembers them for love songs and velvet harmonies, their timeline tells another story, one of constant struggle behind the spotlight. Every great story becomes more convincing when anchored in evidence, and the saga of The Moments is no exception. Their journey is littered with fragments of testimony, legal documents, and insider whispers that together paint a haunting picture of how fragile fame can be. One of the earliest mysteries revolves around the recording sessions of the late 1960s. Industry insiders have long alleged that Sylvia Robinson, co-founder of All Platinum and Stang Records, occasionally added her own vocals to certain tracks without publicly acknowledging it. While never officially confirmed, session musicians from that era claimed her unmistakable timbre could be heard tucked behind harmonies on a handful of songs. This raised uncomfortable questions. Were fans always hearing the moments, or sometimes Sylvia herself reinforcing their sound? Financial disputes provide another layer of evidence. In interviews conducted during the early 2000s, Al Goodman himself lamented the catastrophic 2002 Sugar Hill Records studio fire. He estimated that he personally lost around $500,000 worth of master recordings and intellectual property. This wasn't speculation, it was his own first-hand account of watching decades of work turn to ashes. The fire not only erased tapes, but also extinguished a portion of the group's financial future, since master ownership is often the key to long-term royalties. Royalties, in fact, became one of the most contentious battlegrounds. The Moments later. Ray Goodman and Brown, alongside the estate of Sylvia Robinson and even the Sugar Hill Gang, launched legal action against Universal Music Group. Court filings alleged that unpaid royalties and publishing rights had been withheld for decades, covering some of the most influential catalogs in R&B and early hip-hop. Though the full details of settlements were not always made public, reports confirm that a legal agreement was eventually reached, suggesting at least partial validation of their claims. It was a rare glimpse into how even legendary artists often struggle for financial recognition long after their songs become cultural milestones. Beyond courts and contracts, there are voices both bitter and nostalgic. Former member Mark Green has publicly stated that he never received fair compensation for his contributions, which is why he refused to rejoin the group in later years despite invitations. Instead, he pursued his own project, performing as The Moments featuring Mark Green. His insistence on reclaiming the original name adds credibility to his grievance. He did not just walk away, he carried the weight of unfinished business. Meanwhile, fans and journalists have pieced together discrepancies across album liner notes, suggesting that certain background vocals may have come from studio singers like Leslie Valentine or Rhea Young. Whether these additions were acts of necessity, creativity, or quiet substitution, they remind us how slippery authenticity can become in a recording booth. Taken together: Goodman's testimony, Green's grievances, insider allegations, and verified lawsuits. The evidence forms a mosaic of both fact and contested memory. And while not every detail can be proven beyond doubt, the accumulation of voices, documents, and outcomes leaves one undeniable conclusion. The Moments were not only victims of time and tragedy, but also of a music industry where power rarely favored the artist. To understand why the Moments rose and fell the way they did, you must step back and view the network of people and forces surrounding them. This was not just a group of singers, it was a battleground of label owners, managers, lawyers, and even other artists whose fates intertwined in ways fans never saw. At the center stood Sylvia and Joe Robinson, the powerful duo behind All Platinum and later Stang Records. Sylvia wasn't merely a producer, she was a strategist who shaped the sound image and opportunities of the Moments. Joe, meanwhile, handled the business machinery. Together, they controlled contracts, royalties, and most importantly, the legal ownership of the name, The Moments. Their role was dual champions who propelled the group into the spotlight, but also gatekeepers who decided how much of that success the artists themselves would ever truly own. Linked directly to the Robinsons were the artists, The Moments themselves. The early trio, Eric Olus, Richard Gross, John Morgan, paved the way only to be replaced by new blood like Mark Green, Al Goodman, Billy Brown, and later Harry Ray. Each member entered this web of control bound by contracts they didn't always fully understand. Their motivation was clear: they wanted fame, recognition, and a fair share of the fortune their music generated. But the contracts tilted power upward, leaving them dependent on the Robinsons' decisions. On another branch of the network were the managers and radio personalities Frankie Crocker, Herb Hamlet, and Eddie O'J. They were crucial connectors, giving the group access to airplay bookings and credibility. Herb Hamlet, in particular, acted almost like an unofficial guardian, making sure the group was promoted in Rochester even after he moved. But this layer also created dependency. The group's survival relied not just on their talent, but on the goodwill of radio gatekeepers. Then came the lawyers and courts. Whenever disputes arose over royalties or ownership, the legal system became the battlefield. Lawsuits against Universal Music Group decades later highlighted just how entangled their finances were. Settlements were reached, but only after years of delay, showing that in this network, legal players often determined when, if ever, artists saw justice. Surrounding this core were other artists and groups linked by the Robinson Empire, the Whatnots, who collaborated on Girls Part 1, the Sugar Hill Gang, who later joined in lawsuits over royalties, and even future stars like Alicia Keys, who reintroduced Ray Goodman and Brown to modern audiences. Each connection reflected either an alliance or a reminder of how the group's sound continued to ripple outward. No story is complete without acknowledging the cracks, contradictions, and counterpoints. While much of the narrative around The Moments focuses on exploitation, unpaid royalties, and identity theft, there are perspectives that complicate this picture and perhaps soften it. Take the oft-repeated allegation that Sylvia Robinson secretly layered her vocals into certain tracks. On one hand, this is presented as deception, a way of inserting herself into the group's work without credit. But on the other hand, defenders argue it might have been a form of support. Sylvia was, after all, a seasoned singer herself. If she added harmonies, it could have been to enrich the sound guide inexperienced vocalists, or ensure the records were commercially strong enough to compete in a cutthroat market. In this light, her involvement might look less like theft and more like mentorship, though the absence of transparency remains troubling. Then there's the matter of royalties and contracts. Many members spoke about missing payments and unfair deals, and lawsuits against Universal Music add weight to those claims. Yet industry insiders counter that the record business in the 1960s and 1970s was universally harsh, not uniquely so for The Moments. Countless groups from Motown acts to soul quartets signed away rights without fully grasping the legal language. Was this targeted exploitation, or simply the norm of an era where artists rarely held the upper hand? That nuance matters because while injustice occurred, it was part of a much broader systemic issue. The identity confusion, who sang on which track and why, also raises debate. Some critics frame it as deliberate obfuscation, a tactic by the label to maximize output while minimizing costs. But others suggest it was pragmatism. If a member left mid-session or was unavailable, producers may have reused earlier recordings or brought in studio singers just to keep release schedules on track. In other words, it may not have been malice, but efficiency. Still, this leaves fans in the uncomfortable position of questioning authenticity. Even the group's transformation into Ray Goodman and Brown can be read two ways. To the band, losing the name The Moments was a theft of identity. Yet from the label's standpoint, they had invested in branding, distribution, and promotion, so claiming legal ownership of the name was standard business practice. Should legacy belong to the artists who created the sound or to the company that marketed it? That question is still debated across the music industry today. Finally, the deaths of Harry Ray and Al Goodman and Billy Brown's health struggles are often framed as tragedies overshadowing the music. But some observers caution against romanticizing the pain. They argue that the moment's resilience, continuing to record, perform, and even collaborate with stars like Alicia Keys, proved that their story is not only one of exploitation, but also of survival and reinvention. In the end, the gaps and counter-arguments don't weaken the narrative, they enrich it. They remind us that history is rarely black and white, and that in the music industry, heroes and villains are often intertwined. And perhaps that's why the debate around the moments remains alive. Was this group primarily a victim of a ruthless system, or an example of how even under pressure, artists can adapt, endure, and shine? Every great story has a breaking point, and for the moments, those points came with shocks so sharp they forever altered the group's identity. The first twist hit like a betrayal. In 1979, after years of tension with Sylvia and Joe Robinson, the group finally decided to leave Stang Records. But walking away came with an unexpected knife to the back. They no longer owned their own name. The Moments. The very title that had carried them from Washington, D.C. street corners to international charts legally belonged to the label. Imagine pouring years of sweat and harmony into a brand only to wake up and find it snatched away in a courtroom. From that day forward, they were no longer. The Moments, they had to reintroduce themselves to the world as Ray Goodman and Brown. For fans, the music sounded familiar, but the rebranding left a scar that never fully healed. Then came the tragedy that silenced a voice too soon. In 1992, Harry Ray, the romantic lead who had breathed life into hits like Sexy Mama and Look at Me, I'm in Love, died of a stroke at just 45 years old. His death was more than personal, it was symbolic. The man who had embodied the group's golden sound was gone, leaving fans wondering whether the harmonies they loved could ever be the same. For Billy Brown and Al Goodman, continuing meant singing not just for themselves, but in memory of the brother they had lost. And yet fate had one more twist this time, a resurrection. In the early 2000s, when their name had faded from mainstream memory, Alicia Keys invited Ray Goodman and Brown to sing backup on her chart-topping single, You Don't Know My Name. The collaboration did more than revive their voices, it restored their dignity. Suddenly, these men who had once battled lawsuits and losses were performing on national television alongside Beyoncé and Missy Elliott, proving that even after decades of turmoil, their sound was still magnetic. Billy Brown would later call Alicia their angel because she reminded the world that their harmonies still mattered. But perhaps the most overlooked twist is the scandal of authenticity. Long before they lost their name, long before Harry Ray's death, there were whispers that some of the vocals fans adored weren't always sung by the members pictured on the album covers. Rumors suggested that Sylvia Robinson or hired studio vocalists sometimes filled gaps without acknowledgement. Was this deception or survival in a demanding industry? This revelation forces fans to reconsider, were the Moments always the voices they thought they knew? Or was part of the magic carefully manufactured behind the studio glass? These twists, identity stolen, a voice, lost, a revival granted, and the authenticity questioned, are what elevate the story of the Moments from a simple rise and fall narrative into something far more haunting. They show us that behind the velvet harmonies were men constantly fighting battles both visible and invisible. And once you know these turning points, you cannot unhear their songs the same way again. As of 2022, the Moments' legacy rests on fragile shoulders. Billy Brown, the last living thread to their original triumphs, continues to carry the torch alongside newer voices. But how long can one man keep the flame alive? Will the younger members preserve the group's essence, or will the sound dilute with every lineup change? Meanwhile, Mark Green, who still claims he never received fair royalties, remains a wild card. Could his legal hold on the name The Moments spark another courtroom battle? Or will fans be forced to choose between two competing legacies, the official Ray Goodman and Brown versus The Moments featuring Mark Green? And then there's the broader industry question as streaming reshapes music ownership. Will artists like The Moments finally reclaim control over their catalogs, or will history repeat itself with new gatekeepers? The truth is, the story of The Moments may not be over. It could yet twist again with comebacks, lawsuits, or even a tribute revival that brings their harmonies back to center stage. But what do you think? Are we witnessing the slow fading of a legacy, or the setup for one last act of redemption? Through decades of shifting lineups, legal battles, lost masters, and personal tragedies, The Moments later, Ray Goodman and Brown proved one thing: their harmonies could survive almost anything. From Love on a Two-Way Street to Special Lady, their songs became more than hits. They became soundtracks to people's lives. And even as members passed away or walked away, the music never truly stopped. Yet behind the velvet voices were scars that could not be ignored, contracts that stripped them of their name, lawsuits that stretched across decades, and friendships fractured by the weight of fame. Their story is not just about love songs. It is about survival in a system that often valued profit over people. And now we turn the question to you. Do you believe The Moments' downfall was the result of ruthless label greed, or did internal conflicts within the group seal their fate? Share your thoughts below. We want to hear your perspective. If you've enjoyed uncovering this hidden history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And stay tuned, because the untold stories of soul and R&B are far from over.